The first time Evelyn Hart slammed her hand on my mailbox and told me to move that truck or sign off your deed. I thought she was joking until she smiled and said it like she owned the road. I didn't flinch because I'd lived my whole life thinking people like that belonged in stories, not in the quiet cul-de-sac where I'd come to breathe after 3 decades of city noise. But that afternoon something in the air changed, like the weather deciding to go sour and refusing to explain why. My name's Mark Turner, and this is what happened when a small town decided it had rules for me, but not for itself. We moved to Ashford Hollow because nobody likes a homeowner association, right? And I always liked the idea of freedom more than the idea of tidy hedges. My wife, Lena, liked roses and a quiet street. I liked the fact that our lot sat just outside any official HOA boundary. We built a life on mornings that smelled like coffee and sawed wood, and the kind of small, ordinary satisfactions that don't show up in spreadsheets until the day a glossy envelope with a seal I didn't recognize arrived on my doorstep, and everything started to tilt. It began small, as these things do. A survey tucked beneath the porch mat claiming the property line shifted, a neighbor, polite and bearing lemon cookies, who asked very precise questions about a survey I'd never signed. "Oh, don't worry," she said, handing me a napkin. "It's just paperwork. Mark, everyone's doing it. You wouldn't want to be the only one out of step, would you?" Evelyn had that way of folding concern into a demand, like a voice that starts at friendly and ends at command. The message was clear: belong or be moved. At first I laughed it off, but then fines appeared, official-looking notices about land encroachment and critical compliance deficiencies, stamped with numbers and barcodes like a bureaucrat's autograph. I called the county. They forwarded me twice. The courthouse sent me a link, and every time I asked a person for a clear answer I got the same thing back: static. Meanwhile, my mailbox kept producing more paper, each one more insistent, and my neighbors who'd waved when I moved and started giving me the kind of sympathetic looks you reserve for someone whose fault you already decided. Then the small things turned dangerous. One morning, Lena couldn't start her truck, a snapped line like someone had been in the garage the night before, and a note was tucked under the wiper that read, "Next time you'll be farther from home." I remember the chill of reading it, how words that precise feel like a blade. We changed locks, we put cameras, we watched grainy footage of silhouettes moving in the blue, our shoulders hunched, tools in hand, someone memorizing the shape of our life. Fear is not loud at first. It comes in quiet, efficient steps. You learn a lot about people when they get a taste of power. Evelyn's teeth were a polished kind of righteousness, and she had friends, an assessor named Carl who always seemed to be at the right place with the right form, a contractor who just happened to show up and say the soil looked better 12 inches over. They fed each other legitimacy. When someone in town claims authority and backs it up with pieces of paper, those pieces turn into a story the town wants to hear. That the newcomers are messy, that rules are rules, that someone must do the unpleasant work. It was easier for a few to band together and draw the lines than to ask why the lines were drawn where they were. I hired a private investigator, partly because I was angry and partly because anger needs a project. Sam Rivera, local, quiet, knows how to make a notepad disappear and a truth appear dug where the county wouldn't. He found signatures on documents that didn't match the people who'd supposedly signed them, GIS files that had been altered the week we moved in, emails from an account no one could trace that thanked Evelyn for coordinating compliance. When Sam slipped me a USB of recorded meetings neighbors talking about making an example, I felt that old civic script flip into something ugly: jealousy, control, the slow math of who gets to enjoy a place and who gets told to leave. Confrontation is a weird thing. Everyone imagines screaming scenes and dramatic confessions, but most of it is small, corrosive, polite cruelty. I tried to talk to Evelyn once, standing on my own porch with the sun behind me, so I'd look less like I was cornered. "We picked this lot for a reason," I said, keeping my voice level. She cocked her head and said, "You picked it because you wanted freedom, Mark. Some of us pick this road because we like order. Don't confuse your preferences with rights." Then she smiled, the same smile that had started this whole spiral, and walked away with her neighborly composure intact. It wasn't a duel. It was a declaration. We gathered what we could: videos, timestamps, invoices from landscapers who'd been paid to survey at odd hours, a voicemail where a contractor used my name and promised, "We'll make sure the house comes clean." Lena, bless her, found a scrap of paper in the garden with handwriting she recognized from a neighborhood, meeting the kind of detail that matters in courtrooms and in late-night conspiracies. We had enough to rattle a case, but not always enough to force a door. Corruption is often cleverer than the law. What changed everything was a decision born out of desperation. Instead of filing a loan and getting lost in bureaucracy, we chose the one thing the coordinators didn't plan for. We told the whole neighborhood the truth. Not the sanitized version, not the legal brief, but the raw narrative of tampering, of forged stamps, of a note that promised harm. We laid it out in a binder, in videos, in recordings, and we asked for a public meeting. If their power came from whisper and paper, then light might be the only thing that unravels it. The community center was full the night we asked to speak, half the town there for the chili cook-off, half there because someone had started a rumor, half because the world is a small place and curiosity is a muscle. I stood up, feeling my knees a little unsteady, and told the story like a person who'd been slowly waking from a nightmare. The line changes, the fines, the note, the truck's brake line. I showed the grainy footage and Carl's handwriting on a document that no one remembered signing. I watched people's faces shift, some folding into disbelief, others into that peculiar relief that comes when a truth you suspected is finally confirmed. Evelyn was there, as always, wearing the kind of quiet certainty people mistake for virtue. She listened with the same patient smile, and when it was her turn she stood and said, slow and cold, "You all must understand we were preserving the character of our street." Her voice was the kind that looks for moral cover. Then Sam played a recording of her, laughing in a kitchen and saying, "We'll show them what happens when you don't play by the rules." The room breathed a sound like a held thing released, and the mask slipped for a breath-long second. That's the cinematic part, the part you picture if you like dark dramas. Faces turning, a hush that feels like a verdict, the rustle of chairs. Someone in the back started recording. Someone else called the county recorder on speaker, and by the time law enforcement walked in, not the small-town deputies who'd been polite, but a county investigator with a serious badge and eyes that already knew paperwork. The story had legs. They asked questions that revealed networks, contractors who got checks from an anonymous account, an assessor who'd misplaced an original file, neighbors who'd been promised something in return for silence. Evelyn didn't go quietly. When officers moved to make a few inquiries, she stepped up close to me in the hallway and said, quiet enough that only I could hear, "You think this is over? People like me don't disappear after a meeting, Mark. We adapt." There was a small laugh in her voice, the kind that meant she'd thought a few steps ahead. I felt small and furious, a peculiar combination that steadied me more than fear did. The aftermath was messy and legal, and for a while, public. Arrests followed slowly, not in dramatic cuffs, but in subpoenas and suspended licenses, and an audit that pulled the thread and found the whole tapestry rotten in places. Some people who'd enabled Evelyn came forward, tears and apologies and stories about how fear of exclusion led them to make poor choices. The county redrew maps, revoked some fines, and opened a hearing where our evidence, the recordings, the altered GIS files, the contractor invoices finally had a home. But the neat ending is a fantasy. The court can only do so much for the quiet life you once knew. We got restitution, enough to fix the truck and replace locks and put up a fence that was, ironically, more about feeling safe than anything else. Evelyn got charged with several counts related to fraud and intimidation, but she walked out the first day of trial with legal counsel and a face like she'd been robbed of nothing. In town, people still pass by our house with an awkward nod, and I catch myself checking the driveway for shapes that shouldn't be there. I've thought about what drove her envy, the lust for small victories, a craving to control what she felt slipping away. Power is an addictive thing, and communities handed to a few for the greater good can become private empires. I don't excuse anyone who did harm, but there's a lesson in how easily a decent-sounding mission can be corrupted by petty resentments and by people who mistake order for ownership. So here's where I stop and ask you something, because the one thing I didn't expect when this all started was how many people would want to talk about it once it was out in the open. What would you do if the quiet corner of town you love turned on you because someone else decided they knew better? When does a community's right to regulate cross the line into someone else's right to live? Tell me which side feels like justice to you, and what you'd do if your neighbor's smile had a plan. Share this, Argue in the comments. Bring your town story. I read every argument. And if nothing else, maybe talking about it keep us honest, if only for a little while.